I would like to introduce today's presenters. Michael Jansen, Chief Research Officer, guides the practice's research agenda and architecture by leveraging his extensive experience to identify and unlock emerging trends. Alicia Mittal, Practice Director, is a member of the IT services team and assists clients on topics related to digital transformation, applications modernization, LOT, AI, ML, and adaptation of other advanced technologies. Yugal Joshi, Vice President, leads Everest Group's technology services research and advisory practices spanning multiple programs such as applications, platforms, digital, and cloud services. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Michael.
Thank you, Ryan. Hello, everybody. Wow, as we enter this time of year, I'm thinking back to the beginning of the year and what was our number one issue. And at the time, it was one of the top issues was focusing on how do we help our enterprises continue their evolution or business model changes. And a key part of that was applications enhancements or development or improvements. As we think of where we're at right now, business demand is skyrocketing. As we move into a post-pandemic or hopefully a post-pandemic environment, the demand for continuing to evolve the business model continues. And part of that solution, part of the answer for making that happen is a focus on applications development and all things applications. So the topic of the day is extremely relevant. And so before we get started with the deep dive, we wanted to actually open this up and let you have a say in what you're thinking about. So we're going to do a quick poll here. And the question is for you to answer is, what are your biggest issues in your applications area? And as that poll becomes open, go ahead and click your answer there. You can choose up to 3, and it should be open right now. So go ahead and choose what you think your 3 biggest issues in your applications area. All right, so my favorite choice, or what I thought was going to be the number 1 choice, is rapidly appearing at the top of the list. Okay, we'll leave it open for another 5 seconds. Count them down here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so pretty clear winner at the top, but and it's not surprising, talent. In fact, I will suggest that I'm looking at these answers here. Shortage of talent to implement is by far the number 1 issue. Just a couple of you seem not to have a talent issue, and for the rest of you, I think you can go look at that organization, those organizations, and maybe that's where you can find some for yourself, I guess. Steal from your neighbor. But shortage of talent, and then the second one, really a tie for second here, lack of cohesive application strategy, along with mired down in legacy platforms. Yugal, any reaction to these answers?
No, I think talent one is a default. I guess it's just everywhere. The war for talent, be on the supply side, be on the buy side, is just very, very common. So I'm not surprised on the talent side, at least, Michael.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised though. Culture is lacking, or it's not a fun place to work. Actually, ranked dead last, and or right at the bottom there. And so I guess people are not as concerned about that specific issue. So I guess that's good news. All right, so let's move into the content. And Yugal, why don't you start off with a little bit of a definitional message here on today's session?
Yeah, so I think what is happening is, and I guess pandemic did it further, that the digital transformation of enterprises was anyways going, but then the pandemic came and the speed to market became the core function around which all the enterprise was moving, which meant releasing application faster, and not only new applications, but the applications that were being modernized as well. Having said that, in the rush to do this, in this frenzy of being fast and the first to the market, time to the market, we see many enterprises sort of taking shortcuts and not really doing what they have to do to be a really competitive enterprise in the long run. And we do believe a lot of them are creating what we call modern technical debt across different parts of the organizations. And they need to be cautious of that and this is what we are going to discuss in this webinar, what they need to do to ensure that they remain competitive in the future as well.
Okay, all right. So we're going to break this the webinar into 3 basic sections. We're going to do the rush for new applications. So we'll get a little more definition. We'll define it and give you some metrics around what we're seeing there. And then we'll talk about how to build an application organization for the future. And then if you have questions, we'll keep them. You can actually submit them along the way, or if we don't have time for them or they don't make sense in the flow here, we can save them for the end. But do feel free to enter the questions into the Q&A chat or the section of the Zoom platform. Okay, so let's get started here. And Alicia, talk to us about the building blocks here. When you say the building blocks, what do you mean?
Sure. So Yugal talked about rush for new applications. Let's try and understand what are these enterprise objectives that is leading enterprises to adopt these new applications and adopt them really, really fast. So let's call them 5R. We have some really nice framework here. So enterprises, first of all, want to be receptive to their client needs, the expectations the employees have, what the society expects out of that organization, and essentially delivering more personalized and exceptional experience to employees and customers and everybody else they interact with. From a technology standpoint, what it's resulting in is leveraging analytics, AI, and lots of other technologies to understand customer sentiments, enable hyper-personalization, and lots of other broader objectives to be more receptive to client expectations. Secondly, as they realize the need to be more responsible, which is, as enterprises are under scrutiny for the impact that they are creating to their businesses, they are trying to be more effective and efficient in how they run their operation, such that they follow more sustainable business practices. They are seen as responsible organizations by their customers, partners, and the entire ecosystem. Reliability is the third driving force that's leading enterprises to invest in these new age applications and invest in them really fast. Usage of secure systems as enterprises become, this e-businesses, particularly in the post-pandemic era. The need for ensuring cybersecurity, personal data protection, and projecting yourself as a reliable enterprise becomes important. Now, this is a very important theme, and we'll come back to this again to reemphasize how this is and can be a major impediment for growth for enterprises if not taken care of well. Next is responsive, but I'll park it for a minute and cover the resilient part first. Enterprises are also investing to build organizational resilience by adopting, technology, cloud analytics and whatnot, getting prepared to address any future similar black swan events like this entire pandemic. And all of this is being done by building a very strong IT foundation, modernizing legacy systems. And we discuss all of this in much more detail. And no surprise here, of course, technology is being looked at now as the key discussion point, is being considered as a key discussion point in the C-suite. Finally, coming to the responsive part, this is where the frenziness comes in more than anywhere else. Essentially meaning enterprises want to become more nimble and agile, changing and adopting the technology levers like modern applications, analytics, clouds, etc., at a very, very rapid pace, changing the approach dynamically as the enterprise ecosystem demand changes, and achieving all of this by adopting agile principles, DevOps principles, and these are the go-to approaches for most of the leaders now.
Alicia,
let me share.
Alicia, that being responsive is, if that's the #1 objective, that's directly contradictory to the quick poll there we did at the beginning, where organizations said they're mired down or have legacy applications or lack of a cohesive strategy. So it looks like there's some work to be done there.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what is something that we will cover as part of our discussion over the next 60 minutes of why these contradictory objectives are actually leading enterprises to create more of that modern technical debt that Yugal just talked about, and what is the best-in-class approach that we are witnessing some of the leading enterprises adopt. which most of the enterprises should be focusing on. Before we move ahead, let me share some interesting facts with you to further stress upon this point of responsiveness and highlight the changes that we are witnessing in the tech adoption landscape in recent times, again, particularly triggered by the pandemic. Our research stated that as many as 58% of enterprises actually accelerated their Agile and DevOps adoption in 2020 alone. And during the same time, the cloud native engagements increased by almost 2.5 times in terms of the number of engagements that enterprises were focusing on from a next generation application architecture standpoint. There are other very interesting, mind-blowing statistics, while encouraging and very interesting for tech followers like ourselves. On the other hand, the expectations of adopters of these applications, the enterprises themselves, that's also increasing exponentially. And again, that point of mismatch that is really creating a huge ecosystem conflict.
Yeah, and I think so. So the expectation from applications, as Alicia just talked about, being responsive, building a responsive organization. Over a period of time, we have seen that enterprises started thinking of applications as, okay, run what we are doing today. Then they started to focus on, okay, I am in a certain business, but then enhance it now. Now, what is happening is enterprise strategy is changing. In fact, a lot of enterprises are evaluating different business models. They are experimenting with multiple things. In fact, today they are in some business, they may not be in, let's say, 5 years from now, or they may think they are in industry X, but then 5 years from now, they may be in completely different industry, which means growing the business is becoming very important. And as Michael said earlier, that we are seeing demand recover. So this speed to market will become further important. How do you capture market share? How do you be fast to the market, first to the market as much as possible? And then of course, there are different aspects around, using business SLAs, experience level agreements, and other things. But the net of it is, because given the focus of entire application organization is now towards growing the business, yes, they have a lot of managing of applications to be done, but at the same time, they have to keep growing at the speed of the business. The businesses have multiple ideas. They want to experiment different things. They have different infrastructure now at access, which they can use, and then create POCs which they can sell to the client. So a lot of the pace is getting enabled, and businesses want to capture on that pace and then be first to the market. So speed, again, to Alicia's point, is becoming extremely critical in this entire application landscape, which is generally enabled by the adoption of Agile DevOps, cloud services, and of course, next generation operating models.
So Yugal, when you and I were speaking earlier, so there's another dimension here that's starting to come onto the radar as well.
Yeah, so Michael, I think, and Alicia did touch upon this, sustainability is becoming a big focus within the ESG umbrella. Some of the queries that we end up getting from our enterprise clients could be very simple, but they are very complex to solve for. So for example, one of the client asked us that, suddenly we got an email from the CEO who's being now pushed by the board that, okay, tell us what is our carbon emission by application. Now, what happens in an enterprise is that infrastructure and multiple services are shared. So there is no clear view around, okay, what this specific application is consuming. So they were trying to find any solution out there or any service partner that can help them build something quickly, so that they can measure, at least for measure of their application, what is the level of carbon emission. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything like that. So they are still trying to figure out, okay, how to respond to board. But the point being, such type of queries are now multiple, and this is just one example. There are different enterprises asking very different questions, could be at a very basic level, but solving them is becoming complex from an application landscape point of view.
Okay, great. All right, so let's go ahead and open the polls up again. We want to get another perspective here on with regard, to how ready do you believe your application organization is to cater to this market disruptions? So as we just went through that, probably one of the bigger disruptions we'll go through, but other disruptions as well. Have you benchmarked it? And we know we are best in class. So this is just to pick one of these, but we have a benchmark and we're working toward filling the gap. We don't know how we compare, so we were kind of flying blind. We think we're pretty good, but we can always learn, and there may be a fair answer, and we don't intend to be best in class, or because we can't afford it. So single choice on this one. So pick the one that's most relevant to you. And okay, we'll give it another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so the number one answer there, so this is not one, because we're doing this single choice, is we don't know how we compare. So really, it kind of looks like we're split between we don't know how we compare, and we have benchmarked, and we're trying to fill the gaps here. Alicia, any perspective here?
Yeah, this is interesting, Michael. A lot of enterprises, I think, at this stage are in the situation, they know they have gaps, they know they need to invest, but what is the best in class, both from a technology adoption standpoint, from a process standpoint, is something that remains as a gap area or a blind spot for a large number of enterprises. And that's something that we are seeing here as well.
Okay. And nobody was willing to step up that we don't intend to be best in class. So that's good, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. So talk to us about the next gen applications.
Yeah, so while there's a lot of hysteria around adopting new applications and equally high expectations from these applications, what we are witnessing is enterprises want to get that transformation done now, now and now. However, more often than not, applications have failed enterprises in delivering the intended benefits, or they have led to issues that enterprises hadn't anticipated in this journey, some of which are listed right here. Poor value realization, quality issues, failure of large transformational projects, or declining productivity, and many more. There actually might be even more that enterprises deal with, which are not mentioned here. Let's spend some time discussing the potential pitfalls and the, let's double click on each of these for now. We did a survey with our enterprise clients, and while every enterprise wanted to reduce their legacy footprint and adopt modern technology, more than 3 out of 4 believe that they are not getting the value from their applications investments. Value, when I say, it's in terms of ROI, in terms of efficiency or effectiveness, in terms of experience that they wanted their clients or the employees to have in this virtual setup, the engagement and the convenience that they expected their workforce to have, and all the other business objectives that they started this entire journey with. And on this point of employee experience and efficiency, Yugal, would you like to talk about the productivity issues that we are seeing?
Yeah, and I think it is quite fascinating to see these, if you move ahead, that we have used a lot of ways to become productive in the application organization, be it from a developer side, be it from a release management perspective, be it from the operation side. And if we consider software building and software services as a market, as almost like a country, and then see the GDP of this, that has actually increased. Having said that, the pace of growth has declined. So then there's a deceleration in terms of creating the same output, which means irrespective and despite all the technology and tools that we have used, the pace of productivity growth has decelerated. That makes an enterprise, or that should make an enterprise think what is going on, which also goes back to the earlier point that we had on the poll where people said, okay, no, I'm happy in this place. But then enterprises need to see, okay, whether people are just assuming they are happy because they are fine with the work they are doing, or there's a need to improve. And as we say, given the fact that productivity has decelerated, it has not declined, but it has decelerated. What is the role of next generation adoption models that we have in the enterprise? What's the role of new tools and technologies? How should enterprises uh, assess their service partners? How should they hold them accountable for this productivity? So there are multiple of these issues that keep cropping up. And as we saw in the poll earlier, that talent part is absolutely critical. If you see that with this, that on one hand we are struggling for talent, on the other hand that existing talent may not be able to do the job productively. That's Now these two are concerning things to address. And then in addition to productivity, despite the adoption of next generation application models and agile and DevOps and whatnot, the number of projects that are probably struggling has increased in the last couple of years. And there are different reasons for it, right? Agile DevOps is just one of it, but then there are reasons around operating model, there are reasons around the history of the organization, the way it is structured, and so on. But the thing is, application projects or any transformation project is extremely expensive. And despite that, if eventual ROI or the timeline or the cost of the project aren't met, that creates suspicion in the business. We believe that ends up fueling the fire that is always there in technology teams, that the business and the tech teams do not align well, because business believe that the technology teams aren't able to deliver value which they have signed up for, and the technology team will send the blame back, saying that business is not able to tell requirements clearly. So fascinating developments within application organization from a success of application initiatives.
So Yugal, this is not exactly the most cheerful slide that I've seen here recently. It's not good, and it's getting worse from my interpretation. But we've been talking about agile development as being part of the solution here. It's supposed to enhance project success. Why are we not seeing the improvements that we would have hoped for?
Yeah, so I think there is an entire organization muscle that we need to make it a success. So for example, lot of our clients come back to us and then say, we would want to adopt agile and DevOps, but our funding model continue to be waterfall. Yes, we are able to make one MVP in a month's time, but then the next funding comes after 3 months. How should we change our funding model? So unless the funding model change, the entire agile DevOps that we want the enterprises to adopt isn't going to work. That is one part of it. Second part of it is, and this is fascinating, that as we see more cloud adoption, more modern application adoption, the technologies that build those modern applications are extremely hard to do. And if we combine that with lack of talent and declining productivity, that's a sad problem to solve for. For example, Kubernetes, it is extremely hard to do. Any service mesh, they are extremely hard to do. And on top of it, you do not have people to do it. So developers who believe that, now they have cloud services, now they can get infrastructure faster. Some of this is happening, but as lot of this agile DevOps adoption continue to be in small pockets rather than at a scale level, lot of stuff that we discovered in our DevOps research is that there's a significant patchwork of DevOps process and tools somehow to make your CI/CD pipeline run somehow, not as a process. So scaling that is becoming a challenge. Talent issue is of course a challenge. Modern applications are difficult because the underlying technologies are very complex. And when you combine it with lack of talent, it becomes a multiple whammy issues for enterprises.
Okay, so this whole agile development, I mean, it's a hot topic. I think a lot of people are promoting it. We actually have a webinar coming up on September 14th. The title of it is Agile Working. Where are enterprises going wrong? So the registration for that's going to open up next week. And if you're interested in digging a little deeper into that, I think it's going to be a fascinating webinar to hear our SMEs talk directly on this topic, Hugo. It's going to drill down on some of the things you just brought up.
Yeah, interesting. So, while we're talking about agile, one important thing that we cannot miss out, and I was talking about it in the beginning of our discussion as we started, was enterprises are trying to become more responsible, and they're trying to project themselves as a reliable enterprise. That is where we come to the point of quality assurance. This approach of faster time to market is leading at times enterprises bypass this much needed quality assurance stage as well, resulting in poor performance, security gaps, or just failure at delivering the intended experience of the customer. You think about some of the fiascos are listed out here, but if you think about the large cyber attacks that happened in 2020, say Apple and Google had to block NHS's COVID-19 app due to security issues. The CEO of Zoom had to apologize publicly for massive security issues. Passengers were stranded at Heathrow Airport due to some check-in systems meltdown, and the list goes on and on. All of these actually aggravated in 2020 much more because of the online virtual interactions. And mind that these are just individual enterprises. The attacks on technology products have an even widespread impact at times. So those, on the issues part, again, iterating new age applications, while there's a lot of positive sentiments about adopting them and positive intention, there are many failure points that can result in such initiatives failing miserably. So Michael, I think we have discussed the issues at length. Let's try and solve for them now.
Yeah, so I think that builds into the next section here, which is how do we build that application organizations to avoid some of these less than cheerful statistics and statements here. So Alicia, take us down into that.
Yeah. So we believe building these next generation applications and avoiding all of these failures that we just talked about requires enterprises to put an extra emphasis on things that go beyond technology adoption alone. These are much broader themes. The sourcing model, for example, how do you source the capabilities? And in the first poll, we saw talent being one of the key issues, which brings the point back to sourcing and your partners and engaging with the right support system in this journey. The second is the modernization model. While you know the elements, the tenets of technology that you want to adopt, having a structured modernization journey, clarity on what you want to do, why you want to do, and how, and what is the best approach to achieve that end objective is equally important. So the journey is much more important than the final destination that's in visibility. And lastly, the operating model, the culture of the organization, the structure in which you work, all of that needs a definitive focus for these initiatives to be really successful. And this operating model part is actually sometimes the most complicated one to get right. So let's start with the operating model first, decoding what this best-in-class operating model looks like.
And I think it's an art of the possible, right? So we are not saying when we work with our enterprise clients, this is generally we use almost a market standard to push your thinking, the Western model, where you're trying to build a generative work culture within organization and specifically within application organizations, which are performance oriented rather than power or rules based, which is extremely important. So a few months back, we worked with a very large CPG company, and then we saw how they are structured internally, the way they were working, the way they were behaving, because a lot of the times the organizations behavior emulate the way they have structured. A lot of the structure actually comes between their real transformation journey without them realizing. That's why if you go back to the poll that we did, right, a lot of the people say yes, we have benchmarked ourselves, but and we are trying to bridge the gaps. Many say we have not even benchmarked. Some say we do not even know where we are. And the reason being, a lot of the enterprises get caught with what they are doing as of today. There's a lot of pressure to be first to the market, speed to the market, building application faster, modernizing application faster, without actually changing the operating model. And then when things do not work, then they end up blaming each other. Okay, technology team did not do its work, release management failed, operations team failed, or business requirements weren't clear, product owner could not communicate with the dev team. So a lot of the ball passing happens, which is not what we call a generative culture. In a generative culture, we are cooperation is all is of course is important, and then risks are shared, because now you are working towards a common goal, rather than thinking this is a different team, that is a separate team, and then all of them have a different agenda to run. It is difficult to do, but at least in the clients with whom we work with, we have seen that unless they do some kind of tweak to their operating model, it is almost next to impossible to get a reasonable transformation project a success. You will have a lot of small projects successful, but a meaningful transformation that impacts a large chunk of the enterprise will almost always require tweaks to operating model. So the way we at least have helped a lot of our clients to be, or at least to benchmark themselves to begin with. So building their peer set. Many times enterprises, some of the technology crazy leaders, they go to the extreme and then start comparing themselves with Netflix, Apple, and so, without realizing the reality they have. So despite the fact we say all the businesses are software businesses these days, but traditional companies cannot afford the same kind of talent which a high-end technology company can. So then building that right peer set becomes important. Yes, you should, and we do advise our clients to learn from the best in class. We do put in those best in class in this, but then having a like to like comparison is important. Then analyze their operating model. How do these organizations work? What are some of the areas where we can learn from them? Are there any gaps? And then benchmark ourselves with them, which is of course important. Find the gaps and then work towards filling those gaps. And those gaps could be across process, it could be across people, it could be across the technology investments, it could be legacy landscape, it could be anywhere. But the interesting point is, unless we know where we are, we cannot really begin this transformation journey. And then all of those challenges that we discussed around failed projects, quality issues, productivity, or lack of value from applications, they will keep recurring. So operating model change has to be on the top of any serious enterprise that wants to really drive value out of its applications.
Yeah, let me now talk about the modernization model. So, before we even talk about it, it's the first aspect for any enterprise to embark on a modernization journey is to understand what are your objectives from a business standpoint and from an IT standpoint that you're trying to achieve from this modernization initiative. So in some cases, actually in most cases, 36% of the times we have seen modernizations being targeted just from a cost and scale benefit perspective. There is limited planned strategic investment being done by the organization, and the fund allocation as well is largely ad hoc, need-based, etc. The outcome, of course, in such a modernization initiative will obviously look like, a reduction in total cost of ownership for the enterprise, for example. Just to take an example here, I think a lot of enterprises take this approach for certain small initiatives. But one example that is on top of my mind is Walmart undertook a modernization journey or modernization initiative of its legacy applications, particularly for its Canada business, that were hindering scalability. So its specific issue from an IT standpoint was scalability. And it re-platformed some of its legacy systems to microservices-based architecture, resulting in almost 100% availability, lower cost, and zero downtime, etc. So that's a very clear objectives that it started with and achieved as well, with a simple approach towards modernization. On the other end of the spectrum are what we call the disruptors in the ecosystem, who are considering modernization as a lever to enhance business value, overall business approach, and the customer experience that they deliver to their clients. Initiatives in such organizations are run as well as funded both by the business, largely by the business unit, more by the IT units. And these business units essentially see modernization as a strategic investment or a step towards growth of their business. The outcome also in such initiative is closely aligned to the business outcomes that were anticipated around revenue increase per user, reduction in the GDM time, and so on and so forth, or customer improvement, customer experience improvement. So those are the two end of the spectrums that I talk about. In between the spectrum are enterprises who drive modernization more as an IT agenda, or those who drive modernization as a business agenda. The funding metrics and the eventual outcomes, etc., obviously differ for each of these different enterprises. What we are not saying is everybody needs to have a disruptive approach towards modernization, but what's important is the point that we're trying to make here is no matter what your drivers for modernization of these application estates are, you need to have a much more structured approach, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So that's modernization. The first step towards modernization is to think about a structured approach for modernization, understanding your objectives from an IT and from a business standpoint. So if we double click on this approach standpoint, and let me talk about the key steps that we identify has worked well for some large organizations for mega size transformations. The first and the foremost, like I said, identification of the need. Why do you need modernization? What are the intended and even unintended benefits from this modernization, both from a business and from an IT perspective? The second is to really assess your landscape. Where do you need modernization? You cannot lift and shift everything to cloud. You cannot scrap off everything. So across the value chain, what are the specific zones which need modernization, the processes, applications that are best candidates for modernization? And then building a roadmap for that modernization, how you should approach this journey, the key steps that can ensure minimal disruptions, zero downtime, minimum cost overrun, and other issues that can potentially occur. Finally, a very important step that needs to be in perspective right from the beginning is to have defined and measurable outcomes that relates back to the intended benefits identified in the first step. We'll further touch upon this metrics part in a moment as we proceed further. But this is what the journey of modernization, or the pre-work before the actual modernization starts, this is what it looks like. However, beneath all of this journey are certain foundational elements that can make the journey a success or a failure. The funding model you use, for example, first and foremost. More often than not, enterprises have now started to budget specifically for modernization initiatives. And but sort of beyond budgeting, estimating the potential savings from these investments, trying to reinvest those savings to fund further modernization initiatives. I'm sure you all would have heard the term zero cost transformation, sort of reinvesting the savings from one initiative into the next initiative. That self-funding model is something that can help run the engine of modernization continuously but that requires clear, measurable outcomes and need identification, roadmap development in a very proper manner. The second and the third, team structure, talent, I think we've discussed that enough and more over the past 30, 40 minutes, how talent is becoming important. It is being seen as one of the key impediments, particularly for enterprises to not just initiate, but also scale these journeys. The structure of the team, how should they be organized such that there is better support, there is better coordination. And finally, change management. So no digital initiative essentially can be successful if users aren't onboarded, the workforce isn't trained enough. We have witnessed as many as 68% of initiatives fail just because of poor change management as a core issue that enterprises stated. So an enterprise-wide mandate of tech adoption is important, combined with enough training and handholding to familiarize with these change initiatives and the processes, systems, and operating constructs becomes essential.
We talked about agile. We've talked about some of the modernization. We've talked a lot about the culture part of the conversation as well. But one thing we haven't gotten to, another important dimension, is how do the cloud vendors play into this? What are the sourcing opportunities, and what does cloud play into this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Michael. So I'd say cloud vendors are actually the pivot around which all of this modernization is happening, and they are increasingly becoming the first point of contact for enterprises to build this modernization journey laid out here. Identifying the cloud providers as part of modernization need from a long-term perspective, not just the immediate need, but as enterprises build that entire journey, thinking about talent implications according to that journey with the cloud provider, the business model creation, everything is what we're seeing now being centered around cloud strategy. And that nicely leads us to the sourcing model question.
So in addition to the cloud vendors, of course, they are important. The service partners that the enterprises choose are critical for success in any modernization or modern apps initiative. And we at Everest Group have researched pretty much all types of different application services across cloud native build or DevOps or quality assurance or application transformation, which can be the first point where enterprises can use and then engage with their service partners. Of course, this is just the beginning. This can be an important way of identifying which service partners you would want to work with. And all of them have now built some capabilities around engaging or having some partnership with cloud vendors, building their own tools and IP to drive modernization, transformation. And for enterprises to know which service provider to work with will be extremely important. In addition, holding the service provider accountable. If you move on, yes, now we have the service partner. We have been working with the service partner for 10 years, 15 years. But how do you break that lethargy? Generally, we have seen over a period of time, anti-incumbency sets in, the relationship doesn't have the warmth because everybody is just doing the job as a routine rather than something to bring innovation to the enterprise. So what we have seen is forward-looking enterprises have, after a period of time, they keep changing the matrix. Yes, they will end up assessing, or they will always hold service providers accountable for the basic hygiene matrix around cost and timelines and all. But then how do you elevate those? Some of the focus on business outcomes rather than just technology, experience level agreements. How do you bring in perspective around user experience while you are doing application transformation? Because what happens is, and which is very common during these transformation initiatives, it is very easy for the technology teams to get lost in architectural issues, development issues, quality issues, release issues, and so on, without really thinking about the end user. how is the end user feeling about the newer application, and how do you compare your target state with your earlier stage, right? Because the newer model could be so different compared to what you had in the past. Maybe you do not have anything to compare. So how do you hold the service partner accountable for the business outcomes, right? Yes, we always talked about time to market, which is in a frenzy. Do things faster, but then there are things beyond that, whether the new thing is actually simplifying the process we have or we had. Is there enough change management? We have seen a lot of the enterprises building new cool apps, but people do not use them for whatever reason. One of the reason is, of course, user experience, but then there could be other reasons as well. So have there been enough investment or thinking around driving the change management? I think those become very important. So holding service providers or service partners accountable for the right metrics becomes important. For this, both sides, the service provider as well as enterprises, are equally responsible. Both will have to change the way they are working together, rather than rely on the default way of working, which is more comfortable. But then keep thinking around, okay, what's the best way? What's the next way to actually drive value from our applications initiatives?
All right, so a lot of information there. It's going to drive us into the Q&A portion of this, and we have several questions here that we want to get to. But before that, what we wanted to do is, Alicia and you are just touching the surface here. And so if you're interested in a drill down with them on any of these topics around applications modernization, automation, agile, cloud, all the different service providers that were in some of those peak matrices, I think they track this down into in excruciating detail. So if you're interested in that and you're an enterprise, feel free to click the button now, and they'll be in touch and can set up a briefing with you. And we'll just close that off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we'll get back with you. Okay, so let's go on to the what's the next? We got the conversation around. So Yugal, tell me how you help your clients. We're not trying to make these big commercials, but just in a minute or so, can you tell me how you help your clients?
Yeah, so I think, Michael, some of the things we talked about, right? Operating model assessment, benchmarking, and then transformation. We do a lot of research around peak. So yes, we have our membership offerings, which is what we call subscription offering, and then we have our custom research, which are projects one-to-one, and we pride ourselves being problem solvers. So whatever problem enterprises have on sourcing side, services side, we are there to help. From a membership point of view, we do a lot of peak metrics assessment, where we assess the service provider competence in delivering specific services to enterprises. Talent, I think talent is a big focus area for us. What are the locations enterprises can focus on? And of course, sourcing as well as technology trends. We provide on-demand access, as we said in the poll as well. But in addition to our membership, we have done multiple custom projects with our enterprise clients, helping them across different areas, be it identifying how they should build next generation operating model, how they should change their funding model, what their peers are up to, what kind of location strategy they need to have. So there are plethora of ways we have helped our enterprise clients.
All right, well, speaking of talent, that's one of our first questions here. The question is about the talent shortage. How real is it, and what are you hearing? So who wants to take that one?
So I can go first, and you will feel free to add. So it's as real as it gets. So not just from a current state standpoint, but the issue is expected to sort of aggravate going forward. And there are multiple reasons to it. The pace at which enterprises are adopting technology, the talent that is coming out is not at the same pace. We are not getting the talent at the same pace. Plus, even when talent is there, it's not fully trained. Even if they're trained, they're not always deployable. So the issue sort of escalates at multiple levels from a talent standpoint. And, it's also culminating into problems from ways of working standpoint. The pre-COVID way of working was very different from a post-COVID way of working. So it creates a further issue from engagement and the experience that enterprises want to deliver to their workforce. It creates issues in terms of the locations that they source this talent from, and it creates confusions or problems in terms of the management and leadership. The entire pyramid structure of the talent is also undergoing a shift. While I would, the poll right in the beginning gave a lot of insights right away in terms of how talent is being seen as a key impediment towards growth for a lot of enterprises. Almost 70%, as per our data points, almost 70% of enterprises state this as the number one issue for them to scale their digital initiatives.
So one of the follow-ups to that is, and what I'm hearing out there as well is, we're in the post-pandemic, people were kind of hunkered down for a year or so, and now they're ready to go. And so attrition has now become a real sense of adding to the challenge, exacerbating it. So I'm hearing stories about people leaving for 20 to 40%, and even higher numbers in some cases, walking across the street, which creates attrition. And then when you get some attrition, you get more attrition because they bring their friends, and then you have a vicious cycle there where their previous organization now needs to hire X number of new bodies or replacement bodies, and that creates attrition, and then you get this vicious cycle here. Are you guys hearing about the attrition?
Oh, absolutely. And I think there is unfortunately no easy answer and not an easy problem to solve for. And this is on both on enterprise side as well as supply side. I mean, so the first thing enterprises need to do is have a good and frank conversation with their service partner. What is their attrition management strategy? I mean, for some of the service providers, this time we saw attrition reaching 30%. I mean, these are unheard number on a basis of hundreds and thousands of people. If you have 30% attrition, you are losing almost a small company. So I guess
that number you're quoting there is for a very large service provider. It's one of the biggest.
Yeah. So I guess there are no easy answers which we need to understand. I think some of the practices which at least we have seen working well for enterprise point of view is segregating their workforce in terms of, must retain versus should retain versus good to retain, and then do all those kind of slicing, dicing of data, which of the talent they must retain versus not. No easy answer. And then the second thing we have advised our clients, which some of them have used very effectively, is build almost what we are calling a war chest for talent. Yes, your budgeting might have happened 6 months ago, but then go back to the CEO, go back to the board, whoever it is, because otherwise you may end up seeing your technology team just vanish one fine day, or almost half of the team is gone. So unless enterprises build that war chest for talent, get that incremental funding, stick your neck out, and then make a business case. If we are not able to retain our talent, we as an enterprise business will cease to exist. Create some FUD in front of your CEO and your board. Otherwise, this is going to be an extremely challenging time for most of the enterprises.
Yeah, I think if you have the most beautiful plans, you have the greatest culture, you have a modernization strategy, that can all be great on paper, but if the talent's not there, it's going to be hard to execute. So, and I agree, there's no easy answers here. This is not going to be unique to a certain segment of the workforce in terms of, is this just going to be the outsourcers that have this problem, or the enterprises that have their in-house staffs, or is it going to be onshore or offshore? What I'm sensing is this is across the board issue, and people are kind of taking the excitement of bigger pay opportunities and different, going to where the grass is different, maybe greener on the other side, if you will. But I think that's going to be a challenge. And the question here, I think, in the long run, is how long does this cycle go? Is this going to be a, kind of a ratcheting up, one and done, or is this going to be something that we see in perpetuity?
So I think this is going to go for some time, because remember, in addition to the demand coming back, there's a lot of technology changes that are happening, and companies are not losing talent to peers always. They are losing talent to cloud vendors. They are losing talent to service providers. They are losing talent to startups. So I guess unless enterprises build a collective vision of what they stand for, give that training, learning and development opportunities, show people a career path, show them where do they stand. So there are different ways in which this can be managed, but in a nutshell, this isn't going to be a short-term problem. This is surely a long-term problem. And I think given the technology is changing that fast, this problem can sustain itself. And I remember in the finance world, there's a saying that the markets can remain, markets can be stupid longer than you remain solvent. So same thing in this. We may end up thinking a lot, but this challenge can be so long that some enterprises may find running as a business in itself challenging.
Yeah, no, and I think you're going to have to look at all the alternatives. I think that's going to be the key here. Is it can't just be steal resources from your neighbor. That won't solve the problem. We're going to have to look at productivity and things like that. All right, Alicia, Hugo, thank you for your time today. Some great insights. Of course, you can go to our website, and lots of good content. There's blogs and content there that you can certainly click on, and much of that is available for free. Though, if you really want to dig into it, I encourage a conversation with Alicia or Hugo, and they can get you into a discussion to see what we can do to help. And with that, appreciate your time. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Hugo.
Thank you.
Thank you.